Welcome to Breakthrough Success. I'm your host, Mark Roberti, the content marketing expert, bringing you 5 new episodes every week where I and top-level guests teach you how to take your business to the next level and achieve your breakthrough. Hello, Breakthrough Success Sisters. I just wanted you all to know before the episode actually starts, I've been working a little bit behind the scenes to give you something really special. So a while ago, I wrote my book, Content Marketing Secrets, which helps people create, promote, and optimize their content for growth and revenue. And I just put the finishing touches together to offer that for free to anyone who is interested. So if you want your free copy of Content Marketing Secrets, all you have to do is head over to markgaberti.com/book. Now, let's jump right into the episode. When we come through challenges, when we hit a roadblock, one of the things that you hear very often is that you use willpower to get to the end of that challenge, to power through, but willpower in itself isn't enough. And today's guest actually has a different approach where willpower isn't actually a part of the equation. He has a bunch of hidden keys to success, which he actually covers in his book, Willpower Doesn't Work. So who exactly is today's guest? Well, he is the #1 writer on Medium, PhD candidate at Clemson University, and the author of the previously mentioned book, Willpower Doesn't Work. With his popular writings focused on self-improvement, motivation, and entrepreneurship, today's guest has spent years inspiring others to obtain success through his work, studies, and personal experiences. He's one of Medium's top writers, and that has allowed him to get some of his work featured in places like Inc and Forbes, and just spread his message so more people are able to have that positive effect. More people are able to have better personal development and self-improvement. So without any further ado, today's guest for episode 221 of the Breakthrough Success Podcast is none other than Benjamin Hardy. Benjamin, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Boom, 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 boom. Dude, you're pretty amazing. That's quite an intro, dude. Thank you.
My pleasure, Benjamin. I'm really looking forward to going into this one because when you hear something like willpower doesn't work, that just seems to challenge pretty strongly held belief that a lot of people have. So I'm wondering if, just to kick things off, you could just talk about why you decided to write Willpower Doesn't Work and just share with us what actually does work instead.
Absolutely. And by the way, recently I've been studying what are some of the key components of a nonfiction book that sells over 1 million copies? By the way, Willpower has not sold 1 million copies yet, but I've been studying the components of books that do. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read you some of this stuff because this is really good, and then I'll jump into your question if that's cool.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Go for it. We all love that kind of advice.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be illuminating. So one quick sec. Let's see here. Let me read this. How to sell over 1. You just triggered this because how you opened up willpower. And by the way, absolutely. Hopefully, it does go against a common belief. So this is on the blog of Charlie Cohen, and Charlie he helped most of Tim Ferriss's launches, and he's studied launches. But basically, he said, in order to write a nonfiction book that sells over 1 million copies, you've got to be able to say yes to most of these questions. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to read a few. So, number 1, does your book evoke such an emotional response that the reader wants to talk about it? Does your book challenge an assumption that millions of people hold and are desperately unhappy about? Does your book contain a unique philosophy that the reader can proudly design all or part of their life around? Are you providing readers with recipes to get the exact results they want? Will readers brag about reading your book because it expresses how they want to be perceived and understood? Will your book definitely be given as a gift? Does the title of your book consistently spark discussion? Does your book stand out as uniquely different in its category, or does it get lost in a sea of similar titles? Could your book be, quote, the Bible, quote, for a tight-knit group of people? Does your blah, 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 keeps going. But anyways, I'll be honest, I worked with Ryan Holiday on the creation of this book. He was the consultant in a lot of it. And this book actually was originally going to be called The Proximity Effect. And it was all about how what surrounds you shapes you. Or in other words, what is in proximity to you basically is what determines what you become. And Ryan really challenged me on not calling it that. It wasn't Ryan who helped me, come up with the title, but so what inspired me to write Willpower Doesn't Work? And hopefully that wasn't too random, but this is just what I've been thinking about lately. Because I'm actually currently writing a book called Personality Isn't Permanent. Anyways, so I'm a psychologist. Basically, I'm almost done with my PhD in business psychology. And for the past 3.5 years, my wife and I have been foster parents of 3 kids. And I talk about the story in the book, Willpower Doesn't Work. And by the way, is my sound coming in okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Anyways, so what happens when you go from having 0 kids to having 3 that come from a really, really bad background? It totally messes with you. It changes you. It changes how you view things. And my study of psychology teaches me very much that, that situations and environments and context are primal or are like higher level and more influential than the people within in them. That's like what I learned in my education. But to have it like really hit me in the face in the practical world. So basically, our kids come from down in South Carolina, which is right by where I go to school. And, the reason they get taken away from their parents is because their parents stopped taking them to school. And they've got 5 kids living in a 1-bedroom apartment, really a 1-bedroom trailer covered in trash. And, the parents don't do anything. The kids are neglected. They're staring at TV all day. They're given cough syrup to go to bed. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's just when you actually get 3 kids from this type of environment, it can be pretty shocking, just the behaviors that you experience. However, what happened is, so my wife and I decided to become foster parents, and we obviously knew, and think about that, put yourself in our shoes. If you know that you're going to become a foster parent, potentially of kids from a background like I just described, and you've never been a parent before, maybe never even read a book on parenting, do you think that by taking in those foster kids, it's going to influence and change your life?
Yeah.
Of course. You know what I mean? Of course it is. Of course taking in 3 foster kids is going to change your life, and we knew it would. We knew that it was going to, we weren't fully able to anticipate what was going to happen, but we knew that by changing our environment, we were going to change ourselves. We were going to have to adjust, adapt, figure stuff out. And that's really what happened. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, we're dealing with tantrums. We're dealing with kids that don't know how to go to sleep. We're dealing with all sorts of stuff we've never dealt with before. And we're totally, realizing how underprepared we are and how you really can't prepare for this at all. And you fast forward 2 or 3 years and you realize that you've become a pretty different person. You've become more empathetic, more caring. Your goals have changed, and so basically, over several years of doing this, we watched our kids change and we watched ourselves change. And that was kind of the final experience that really nailed down. I mean, I'd been thinking about the power environment for a long time. I myself came from a really horrible environment. There's a really good quote. I forget who said it. I think Mark Twain. He said, the first step towards success is to get yourself out of the environment you're first enslaved to. And Marshall Goldsmith said, if you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you. I mean, I'd been aware of environment and also very much aware, especially with internet, with all sorts of, globalization, technology, the world is changing so fast. And it's obvious that when the world changes, human behavior changes. You know what I mean? Like in the last smartphones didn't even exist like 10 or 11 years ago. And like now, so much of human behavior, identity, and psychology is influenced by smartphones. And so it's just obvious that when you change the environment, you change the people within that environment. And so the reason I wrote the book is because I saw very few self-improvement books talking at that point. Willpower, grit, self-esteem, goal setting. I mean, all of these things are very popular in Western culture because Western culture is very individualistic. And so because we're so individualistic, we generally ignore or downplay the influence of our environment on us. We think that we're completely independent structures that can will ourselves to do anything. But that's just not the case. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a self-improvement book that took a contrarian approach and also, in my opinion, took a lot more realistic approach and said, if you really want to change your life, you actually can't will your way to do it. Or if you try to will your way to do it, it's not going to be very effective long term because we already know from the research that willpower is a finite resource. It runs out. And that's how most people's lives are. They're exhausted. They're trying to battle against internet addiction, dopamine addiction, stimulants, sugar. I mean, a million other things, jobs they hate, negative influences around them, basically, swimming against an uphill battle. And then I study about people who make radical transformation. Like if you think about billionaires or millionaires, like these people are surrounded by similar people. And so that was kind of a big intro, but really what does work, and really the only thing that can work long term is to create an environment that matches your inner goals, that matches your dreams, that matches who you want to become. If your environment doesn't reflect your inner world, then your inner world is always going to be in conflict, and you're never really going to be able to live it out. So this book is all about how to create an environment that will allow you to be who you want to be and become who you want to become.
Benjamin, I really like that idea of creating the ideal environment for yourself to continue to work where you don't necessarily have to rely on willpower as a finite resource. And one of the things that people wonder, like when it comes to willpower, is just extending it throughout the day. And like with the environment, obviously being more valuable than willpower, because if you're put in the unideal environment, your willpower is not going to last very long. So how do you recommend we stay energized and eager throughout the day? Is it changing environments when you feel like you're going to lose that energy? Is it being in the right environment 24/7? Like, what is the approach we can take to keep our energy up throughout the day?
Yeah, totally. Well, so I think that there's a few different ways to look at this. Number one, yeah, you can make small tweaks to your environment. You know what I mean? Like, so in one of the chapters, I talk about how you should rotate your environment regularly. And I do the case study of Ari Meisel. Ari is an amazing entrepreneur. He's really mindful. He's really amazing. And he basically, he matches the work he's doing with the environment he's in. So if he's going to spend a day writing blog posts, he's going to go to some environment that totally allows him to do that. If he's going to be filming podcasts, he's going to be in a different style environment. If he's going to be and so that's one thing, on a really small, simple scale, what this book in a lot of ways is it's about creating environments that trigger a flow state. And so, flow, which is a psychological, state, which is obviously becoming very popular for people into high performance, is really just the state of mind of being completely absorbed in what you're doing. And it's completely predicated by situations. So situational factors are what create flow, or are what make flow happen. And novelty or newness is just one flow trigger. So, if you just move your furniture around regularly or shift rooms, go to a different room, that is often enough to energize yourself. But more than just environment as like your surrounding, area, in a lot of ways, what I talk about in Willpower Doesn't Work is situations in general. So like, how do you tweak the situation so that there's a lot of pressure, or so one way of changing a situation, for example, is like having a very short timeline. Like having a short timeline on a project you care about could really energize you. You know what I mean? It could really force you to do something. Being forced to do something you've never done before. So that's novelty and challenge and being able to collaborate. So a lot of it's the situation, and I provide case studies. There's obviously like some of the extreme examples about like, people who have cars fall on top of them and their mom, gets some like crazy strength that she never knew she had. And so she can like lift the car off the sun. Like that's a situation that kind of like imbued this woman with like some form of power or energy that wasn't there before. And so what I talk about in the book is engineering situations that summon within you something that maybe you didn't know you had in you, kind of like me becoming a foster parent. Like, how do you create situations that force you to rise to a new level? That was one of the main questions I had in the book. Because there was William Durant. He's someone I quoted at the beginning of the book. There's a really amazing quote from Will Durant. And basically, he was one of the most famous historians to ever live. He wrote an 11-volume series called The Story of Civilization. And essentially, he was asked the question, what is the main thing that shaped human society or human history? And basically, the assumption was that it was key individuals, people like Napoleon and stuff like that. And William Durant said, no, it's not people that shaped history. It's actually extreme situations that are what created these heroes. So he basically said, heroes, they basically form the function of rising to demanding situations. And then he went on to say that the ability of the average person could be doubled if their situation required it. And so so how do you get more energy, to answer your question? You need to set up a situation and an environment that forces you to be in flow, that forces you to be present. I gave one simple example of having a short timeline or of doing work you've never done before. But there's all sorts of ways that you could engineer, either extreme challenge into your life or on the opposite end of the spectrum, extreme ease, and I think you need both. You need time when you're fully engaged, and you also need time when you're fully unplugged. And very few people do that. So those are just some basic thoughts.
And I'm sensing one of the big themes with instead of focusing on willpower, you focus on the environment that you're in, optimizing it, making it better. But some people maybe think, well, how exactly do I do that? I mean, they're just like some things you could think of right away, like going to a nearby Starbucks. But what exactly can we be doing to optimizing our existing environment, like for people who work at home, or finding better ones like going to the Starbucks to work, as I mentioned?
Yeah, of course. Well, so in the book, and by the, addiction is one of the big topics that I deal with in the book, just because addiction is it's an environmental adaptation. But so here's a few really basics, you know what I mean? So one of the chapters is called Change Your Defaults. So in every environment, there's pretty much defaults set up which create unconscious behavior. Most behavior is unconscious and it's completely triggered by the environment. And most of our behavior is so unconscious that we take it for granted. And I'll just give you an example. Like if you walked into the kitchen, if you walked into your kitchen, but I moved all of your silverware from one drawer to another, you would habitually walk to the drawer that the silverware was in initially for a while until your behavior would be required to change. And so I changed your default, I switched the drawer. And so basically, but you walk straight to that drawer without even thinking about it now. You know what I mean? So what psychologists call that is automaticity. So basically what I'm saying is that most of the behavior that people are doing is subconscious, and it's based on how their environment's been set up. And so one of the fastest things you can do is just by simply changing the default option. That may be literally one really easy way to change defaults is just to remove things. And so, obviously in one of the chapters I talk about removing everything that conflicts. For most people, the default option when they wake up is to just pick up their cell phone, because literally their phone is sitting right next to their bed. And, a really easy way to change that default would be to just actually buy an alarm clock and leave your cell phone away from your body. So that's just a simple example of changing a default. And, I think it's really important to start to become mindful of just what is their default behavior. So for example, me and my wife, we're married, we put our kids to bed. What is our default immediately once our kids go to sleep? For a long time, it was just to go and watch Netflix. That was what the default mode was. And we had to actually become first off aware of it and then shift it. There's a concept in the book that I call, so that's one stage, is just actually changing the environment you're in physically, removing triggers, creating triggers. You can actually create triggers that create desired behavior. Because obviously we talk a lot about negative triggers that are distractions, whether that's Facebook or whether that's jumping, walking into the kitchen and being triggered to eat a bunch of junk food. But there's also positive triggers, or what I would call transformational triggers, that you can embed into your environment. A lot of people, and this is a really popular cliche one, but a vision board, for example, having images or pictures on your wall that remind you of your value system, your belief system, or some future goal. So one of the companies that I work with a lot, they're called Gaping Void, and they create what are called culture walls, basically where they help you design your belief system, and then they create art, or what they call artifacts, around that belief system. And the purpose is to cover your environment with your deepest held values and beliefs. And they obviously put these culture walls into businesses. But the goal is for these pieces of art to trigger certain beliefs, certain values, certain behaviors, so that you can, be reminded of what you really believe, and then so that you can be transformed and actually act according to those beliefs. So I have a culture wall, with 20 of my deepest held, values or beliefs that I want to continually be reminded of. That's one thing, is just designing your environment so that it actually triggers desired behavior. Another thing you want to do, obviously, is make your default option what you want to do, and make negative behavior difficult. So just as an example, and technology is a big one for me. When I get home from work, if I have my cell phone on my body, I'm going to subconsciously pull it out of my pocket and look at it regularly, even if I'm trying with all the willpower I've got to be engaged with my kids. The reason, again, is just because it's an unconscious default. And so one of the easiest things to do is just make the undesired behavior difficult. And you could do that by, let's just say, leaving your phone at your office, leaving it out in your car, leaving it completely away, so that it's basically, it's inconvenient to do. Just as an example, I was at Costco with my wife recently, and we were, I wanted to buy these fruit sorbet things. And, whenever I eat them, I kind of don't like it, even though they're delicious, because I also have extreme, fitness goals. And I told my wife, I'm going to buy these. And she said, well, if you buy them, you're going to eat them. And if you eat them, you're going to regret it, And so basically it's one of those things where it's you make one decision that makes all other decisions irrelevant. And so it was just in that one moment, I reframed it. It's kind of like the marshmallow test. The marshmallow test was never really about willpower. That was just kind of, if you actually really study the marshmallow test, it was not about willpower. It was about the kids reframing the marshmallow into something else. It was about reshaping the situation. But that part of it really never got popularized. And so now there's this huge confusion around it. But in this case with me at Costco, I reframed the situation, realized, if I have these things in my environment, first off, I'm going to have to think about it. Second off, I'm going to have to make a choice, which is a bad choice, because it's a choice I don't want to make. And so if I just choose not to put that thing in my environment, then I don't ever have to think about it again. And willpower, by its very nature, is required at the conscious subconscious level. You have to think about it. You have to control your behavior. You generally have to inhibit yourself from doing something that like you're internally conflicted about. So if you just design your environment so that the default is to do what you want to do, then you don't necessarily have to consciously control your behavior all the time, because your environment allows you to just operate how you want to, so that you can use your conscious mind to direct towards higher goals or towards creativity, rather than trying to stop yourself from doing something you don't want to do. I think that's one of the biggest keys of this book, is like, how much of your time are you consciously spending trying to stop yourself from doing something, or trying to control your behavior, or trying to force yourself to do something? Like all of that conscious thought and energy would be so much better spent directing towards something like noble and something worthwhile, because you've set up your environment so that you don't have to deal with that lower level stuff. So those are some thoughts.
And I'm really sensing a big theme on unconscious habits that we don't really think about too much, like pulling out the phone. Like that's something we do so often, and it's just being a little more conscious about those and making them more difficult to do, or anything that fits within that bracket that is hurting our ability to be productive and be in the ideal environment that we're in. And I know you did a lot of research with this book, and I'm sure you reached out to several people. You've seen people who've been able to create environments that help them be productive. I'm sure you've seen people who have not, like they harm themselves with the environments that they've created. So I'm wondering, what do you believe holds most people back from developing like the optimal environment for themselves and being able to live and thrive on more than just willpower?
So will you rephrase just the last bit of that question?
Oh, sure. So like, how can people, what holds people back from creating that optimal environment for themselves?
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, so many things hold people back from creating. And by creating an environment, what I'm really saying is to change their life in a way that aligns with who they really want to be. Obviously, number one is, expectations, commitments, emotional bonds, and relationships. I mean, just as an example, I went and served like a 2-year humanitarian mission, and that experience and that environment radically changed me. And when I came back home from that environment, from that situation, all of my life was there waiting for me. And I had gone through a lot of transformation. This was, a 2-year experience, helping a lot of people, reading lots of books, and I changed a lot. And I came back, and like all of my high school friends and stuff didn't know about the changes that I had made. They saw me the same way that they saw me when I left, but I was no longer the same person. However, I could already feel when I went back that I was falling back into the same identity, the same roles, the same behaviors, the same language that I would use as a high school kid. And, those bonds are deep, and even just, your family and your friends and stuff like that. I mean, so I think one of the biggest challenges of changing your environment is having to readjust and shift your relationships. Because if you really want to change your life, and if you want to, you have to reestablish who you're around. You have to reestablish how those relationships operate. One of my favorite quotes comes from Tony Robbins, actually, and he says, basically, you get in life what you're willing to tolerate. And most people, they tolerate, pretty low-level relationships. They tolerate low-level behavior, and like eating bad food, like getting bad sleep, like doing work that they hate. Like basically, people tolerate lives that they hate. You know what I mean? And so if you want to upgrade your sense of what you can have, if you want to upgrade your sense of what you're what you're willing to tolerate, or decrease, what you're willing to tolerate, and raise your standards for yourself, obviously you need to make some shifts in those relationships. One thing that I've found is that you can obviously still maintain deep relationships even if those relationships change. And I think it's actually very healthy for relationships to change. The problem with relationships is generally they're built on attachments from the past. Like, so for example, my high school friends, like when we're together, because we've like evolved into different types of people, is all we talk about generally when we're together is our past. We talk about high school. We talk about what we did then because that's where our attachment is. That's where the connection is. One of my favorite quotes comes from Dan Sullivan. He's the founder of Strategic Coach. And he says to surround yourself with people who remind you more of your future than people who remind you of your past. And so the idea is really simple. It's this whole idea that you are like the product of the 5 people you surround yourself with. It's like, who do you want to be and who do you need to surround yourself in order to become that? It's this idea that when you change your environment, you change yourself. And that idea is something that I think very few people actually truly appreciate. Like they don't, and it's like, I just keep going back to the case study of myself with the foster kids. I knew when I changed my environment that it would change me. And because of that, I also know that whatever environment I'm in, like that environment is a part of me, and that me and my environment are 2 parts of the same whole. And so you can use that to predictably make change in your life. You can choose to surround yourself with certain types of people. You can choose to take in certain types of information. So it's not just about people. Anything that comes in, whether that's food, information, music. Zig Ziglar said your input determines your outlook. Your outlook determines your output, and your output determines your success. And so it's not just about people, it's about information. Our brains thrive on information. And the problem with most of the information that people put in their heads is that it's very low level, like very low stimulation, very low challenge, very, like most of the information is just like, stuff on social media or stuff that literally, doesn't require a lot of digestion mentally. And so if you want to change your brain, you have to change the type of information that goes in, also the type of food that goes in. You got to change your body because, the more oxygen you have, the better for your brain. And so you've got to actually obviously go running and get in shape, but also your brain thrives on love. And so if you want a more healthy brain, you need more deep, loving, actually powerful relationships. And so, one of the most basic, simple ways to change, your relationships that I talk about in the book, and this is a little different maybe than most people think, but literally it's like to spend money. This is kind of weird, but like I'm talking like buying mentorships or getting into networks like masterminds. Obviously you can get mentorships for free. You can surround yourself with more positive friends for free. But if you want to be very intentional about developing mastery quickly, like be a part of something like whether that's a club or something like that, or a mastermind or some sort of social network of people who are already doing what you want to do. Like surround yourself with people who are already obsessing on what you want to be obsessing about, and who are already where you want to be. And you can adapt to that environment. It's basically the equivalent of trying to learn a language like in your house with flashcards, or like going and actually being in that country and immersing yourself in it and forcing yourself to learn. Like actually go and immerse yourself in an environment and force yourself to learn the language of that environment. And that language involves the beliefs, the values, the behaviors, all of it. And in the book, I talk about how I do that, about how I invest in certain relationships and certain environments, and how those environments allowed me to go like transform my income by 10x year after year. Like when you surround yourself with millionaires or people who are successful entrepreneurs or successful writers, like it becomes a lot easier to do that yourself.
Benjamin, thank you for sharing like so many great insights, and the people who we do associate ourselves with impact who we become. And it's a really great idea, as you mentioned, Dan Sullivan pointed out, that you want to hang out with people who remind you more of your future than of your past. So that like shared a lot of great insights there. And like there are also a lot of great insights in Benjamin's book, Willpower Doesn't Work. doesn't work. But one of the things that I want to ask you, Benjamin, I know you've had to do a lot of research to complete your book. So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you could share with us 3 books that you believe will have a positive impact on us.
Absolutely. The Body Keeps the Score is a really good book. Brain Power. So I forget the author's name of The Body Keeps the Score. It's like Bessel something. It's tough. It's a tough name. Brain Power by Tony Buzan. It's tough because I actually just go through so many books. I'm serious. What's one that has really kind of impacted my thinking a lot lately? Blue Zones, actually, is another book that I've read lately that's really good. Yeah, Blue Zone's all about longevity and about certain environments or certain cultures that create the longest living, people. So Blue Zones, in my opinion, is the number one book on longevity. So yeah, Blue Zones, Brain Power, and The Body Keeps the Score.
Benjamin, thank you for sharing those great book recommendations. We'll have all those in the show notes, markdoverty.com/E221. We'll also throw in Content Marketing Secrets, which is my book, into the show notes, but you guys can go to markdoverty.com/book if you want your copy. And before we wrap up this episode, Benjamin, I've asked you several questions throughout our time together, but what do you believe is one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often?
The question that I really like actually is inspired by Tim Ferriss, but it comes from Peter Thiel, the billionaire. And the question is, how can you achieve your 10-year plan in the next 6 months? I always kind of think about and ask myself. And I think it's a really good question.
Benjamin, thank you for sharing with us that great question, all of your great insights throughout our time together. If you guys want to learn more about Benjamin, get a copy of his book, Willpower Doesn't Work, where you will discover the hidden keys to success. But once again, I can't thank you enough, Benjamin, for taking the time and sharing your great insights with us. It was such a pleasure to have you on Breakthrough Success.
Absolutely, man. Have a good day.
How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn